So I was a lifelong Democrat. I am 51 years old, and I voted for Democrat my entire voting life until the year 2020. And what opened my eyes? It was the George Floyd riots. It was when they called those riots and destroying those cities mostly peaceful protests, but they were mostly peaceful riots. And I saw cities get destroyed, and I watched the Democrats cheer that on. And it was especially eye-opening because that was during the lockdowns. I was living in California. I was barely allowed to drive 10 miles to get a sandwich from some restaurant because the cops were patrolling. We weren't allowed to go anywhere, but yet everyone was allowed to go outside and protest in the name of social justice. And then I watched my friends and I watched everybody who I thought were my friends pile on and say, you must join in. Like we were all zombies. And if you didn't do it, you got ostracized. You had to stay in line. And that was the time where I started to question everything. I started to look around. I realized that we were getting all kinds of mixed messages about COVID and the masks. I was a social worker. I am a social worker. I worked in schools, and I realized that they had me do a secret LGBT group in a high school. And that's when I realized that they used me. They used me to push an agenda on children, to keep secrets from children. I thought I was helping children just figure out their identity without the interference of their parents. What I didn't realize was that I was teaching them an identity that they would otherwise never take on. So many things opened my eyes about the Democrats, and I realized this is not what I thought they were. I thought they were there to help people. That I'm a social worker. I'm a good person. I vote Democrat. That's what I thought. And then I realized all of the policies and all of the things that they were doing are doing the opposite of what they say. They say we need to be accepting, but accepting of who? Accepting of only certain people. And if you have different ideas, you risk losing your job. I realized that many people were very silent when they just had questions about basic reality and basic truth. If someone said a trans woman is really a man, they could risk losing their job and their friendship circle and get in trouble. These things were not okay. And I realized that. And it was 2020 when I realized that everything I ever believed was wrong and that the Republicans were not who I thought they were. They're actually the party of the working class. They understand economics. I kind of was stupid about economics. I understand a little bit more. I read this man called Thomas Sowell. If you haven't heard of him, you should look him up. He's a Black scholar from Stanford, and he really taught me about how these policies are destroying and hurting the poor, and they're hurting families. And since my emphasis and my priority is keeping families together, I realized that the Democrat Party is against families and against children. I actually I testified against AB 665. That's a Democrat policy in California that allowed 12-year-olds to consent to going to their own residential treatment programs. There was a law previously in 2011 that allowed 12-year-olds to get therapy, outpatient therapy, by the age of 12. I didn't see the problem with it then. Now I see. My eyes have been opened. Well, what has that all enabled? That has enabled children to go to therapy and be indoctrinated by activist therapists, not therapists that you'd think are the kind ones that are going to just expand their access to mental health, as they say. There's always another side effect that you don't always think about because they frame it in a way to make it look like it's about being kind. And then you don't realize that there's this hidden agenda that they're going to teach the kids certain things or turn their kids against their parents, or they're going to teach them about pronouns, or they're going to tell them that they were born in the wrong body, and they're going to do, they're going to teach them that they're a victim, that they're part of a victim class, or maybe they're going to teach them that they're an oppressor just because of how they were born. And these things are not mentally healthy. Imagine now there is a law that allows 12-year-olds to go to a group home on their own, and a parent has to fight to get them back. And now they're a ward of the state, and they're allowed to get hormones without the parent's permission. And these hormones are very harmful to their physical and emotional health. This is what the Democrats are for now. When they say it's all about acceptance, it's really about money and power. This was my huge wake up. So I hope for people listening that they recognize that I was bamboozled my whole life, and maybe there are some things that you believed in that, you know, maybe they're not as kind and accepting, or there's some other aspect to them you hadn't thought about before. And that's the thing that I figured out.
So I used to be a big time leftist, liberal Democrat, whatever you want to call it. Um, I would say that I first started buying into Democratic talking points and stuff like that, probably in elementary school. Um, my earliest memory of like being political was we were doing a class vote and all of the kids had to pick a side. You could be a Republican or a Democrat and say who you wanted to vote for. And we had to draw a little donkey or an elephant in the sign and hold it up and give our reasons for voting, which is actually, now that I think about it, kind of not great to do to little kids because they don't really understand the issues. But so I wrote that I was in favor of the Democrats, and our school resource officer, who was his name was Officer Phillip. He was our dare officer, and he was arguing with me because I said I wanted to vote for Al Gore, and he thought I was crazy. And I was having this whole like debate as like a 9-year-old with this grown man, and it was such a visual. Like he's in his uniform and everything, and that kind of was just my attitude forever. I saw it as this anti-establishment, pro-immigrant, pro-woman, pro little guy movement. My family didn't see it that way. My grandparents were big time Republican conservatives, always have been, and they kept trying to warn me that no, we recognize this because it's the same talking points that Castro had in Cuba. We fled Cuba in the 60s. And my mom kept trying to tell them, no, that's not true. And she ended up becoming a Democrat too. And so I just followed all of these Democrat talking points. I lived in California for a while after leaving home and was just kind of entrenched in it there. And I started dropping off from all of my Republican friends because they were evil and I wasn't supposed to talk to them and all that stuff, according to all of the leftist media outlets like Colbert and Samantha Bee and The Daily Show after Trevor Noah took over. I was really big into The Daily Show before with Jon Stewart, but after Trevor Noah took over, then it was really different because now we're not talking across the aisle anymore. Now we can't talk to anyone across the aisle. Um, and I was very anti-gun. I was the shoot him in the leg person. I was the no human is illegal person. I was the super like pro-choice person. Um, I was a trans rights person. And then after I moved to North Carolina, we started watching the primaries, the Democratic primaries, and I saw how they were treating Tulsi Gabbard. This was a woman who embodied everything that I thought the Democrats wanted. She was not white. She was not Christian. Or wait, no, her husband is not Christian, but she was open to other religions. She was a veteran. She was a patriot. She had different values from like the typical white Christian nationalist that they were painting as the enemy. And so I thought, hey, like, why are we shutting her out? Why are people saying that she's a Russian asset? Like, if she actually is a Russian asset, shouldn't we take her out of the military? Shouldn't we investigate her? Like, what's going on? And after that, I started questioning everything. I looked into former policies that I thought the Democrats were for, and I found out that it wasn't true. I found out the truth about all of the green policies and that, the wind and solar power facilities and manufacturing and all of that. That's not actually green. I found out that what was the other thing? Oh, right, that Obama was actually the one who started the camps, quote unquote, for the immigrants and all of that stuff, and that Obama was nicknamed Obama for all of his pro-war stuff, and it was just, like, article after article, and it wasn't like these were obscure niche like sources. These were things like Newsweek, the New York Post, the New York Times, Washington Post, like all of these things that were supposedly like leftist media, quote unquote, talking about these things from years prior. And I brought all of this up to my friends from California. I was promptly shut down and told that they would look into it. They didn't, and they didn't contact me again. Then I voiced a little support for Trump and what he was doing with the sanctions against China for their human rights violations. And I was asked if I was hacked. Um, People got very upset with me. Eventually, I got mass reported on Facebook. I had like posts taken down, all of this stuff from people I thought were friends of mine, and eventually I got locked out of my account, and, yeah, it was just like a rude awakening that these were the people that I thought were my friends, and because I started asking questions or, like, just even opening my mind to other things, suddenly now I was enemy number 1, and, yeah, so all of that essentially pushed me to ask more questions and look into more things. And I was the type of person who cried when Trump got elected, like in the middle of the night, election results. I'm reading them on my phone in tears. And now I'll be voting for him for the second time. And that's crazy to me. I can't believe that I'm in this position because I never would have thought I'd be where I am now, back in what, 2016. So, yeah, it's been quite a ride. The reason I decided to vote for Trump was not only because I was waking up to the fact that I had been lied to for who knows how long. I'm still kind of going down the rabbit hole here and there, like finding out all of these things were fabrications from the Democratic Party, but also because I actually really like what he was doing. I liked what he was doing during his presidency. I found myself agreeing with a lot of his policies. I liked that he was putting caps on drug prices. I liked that he was sanctioning countries like China. I liked that he wanted to revitalize America and our economy by bringing manufacturing back. I liked that he was cutting taxes. I liked all of those things. And I liked that he wasn't trying to divide everybody and distract us from actual issues by talking about race and by talking about sexism and all of this stuff. And I know that a lot of people, like one of the biggest things back in the day when I was against Trump was his sexism this, his sexism that. Anything that you could say about Trump, you could say worse about a lot of Democratic politicians, Joe Biden included. Um, and as far as Kamala Harris goes, I'd rather take a sexist like it or, somebody like Trump who you would say is a sexist, quote unquote, over somebody who's going to deny the fact that women are our own unique sex class and deserve protection. You know, he wants to protect women. He wants to make sure female inmates are not imprisoned with male rapists. He wants to make sure that women have our own sports and men can't just identify into the class. He wants to make sure that children are protected from gender ideology. And he wants to protect our country from I mean, honestly, from illegal immigration that seems a lot like an invasive force. We're not seeing families as much as we're seeing young working men now from other countries just kind of coming in and clogging up the system, taking resources from vulnerable women and children who need them. So I, it's just, it's kind of a no-brainer for me. Again, like, if the worst thing you can say is that Trump is a sexist, then you're really not looking at who you're standing behind. Like, it's something that you need to look at the whole picture. You need to look at the policies. You need to look at what's at stake here. Because honestly, it's everything. It's our speech, it's our rights to defend ourselves, it's our rights to be recognized as women. It's yeah, I can't really I can't really express just how overarching all of these things are and how fundamental these things are to our continued existence as a free country at this point. Um, but yeah, so anybody who's still on the fence, like, let me tell you, I used to be right there with you. I really was 100% blue no matter who. I'm with her, Hillary, like everything. And now here I am. So yeah, it's really something, and I really had to eat a lot of humble pie with that. But I don't know. I'm proudly voting for Trump this year, and I couldn't be happier about that choice, honestly. Another reason that I feel like this is so important is I'm a mom. My daughter's only 15 months old right now, but one day she's going to be a little girl who might want to play sports. And I would rather have a president in office that secures her rights to single sex spaces and sports and protects her that way and protects her speech and freedom of expression and keeps people from telling her that because she expresses herself a certain way, that means she's a boy. I don't believe that Kamala is interested in at all in protecting children. Um, she's still pushing gender ideology. She's wanting to pay for transgender procedures on inmates in prisons and force companies to pay for it and everything else. Like, yeah, no. I want to make sure that my daughter is protected, that her speech and rights are protected, and that she's able to be protected as a girl and as a woman going forward in her life. And we're already seeing articles coming out about how, we had to be a little wonky with the election because we were protecting democracy. We have to try and take Trump's name off the ballot because we're protecting democracy. We have to torch the Constitution, quote unquote, because that's protecting democracy. That's not protecting democracy, and that's really terrifying for me as a citizen and as a mother to think that that is the potential country that my daughter would be growing up in. It sounds a lot like the country that my grandparents fled from. So just having that direct correlation of people who had to escape their government and their country and their homes and leave everything behind that they ever knew or cared about and think about what that would look like for my daughter is terrifying, especially since America has always been the place to come for refuge, for freedom, for protection. And like, if we don't have that, where else can we go? There's nowhere else to go. This is it. So I we have to protect it. I can't think of anywhere else where we could go and hope to find those same protections and those same freedoms. So I want to vote for someone that will make sure to protect those things that we value so highly as Americans so that it secures a future for my daughter and for other people's children as well.
I grew up overseas. I was in a big family, and my father was with the U.S. Embassy. I had parents that were conservative, and I ended up going to a school in California for college where I was introduced to environmentalism, and I became a Democrat. I was involved in environmental issues, and I ended up moving to Davis, California for graduate school. And I surrounded myself with mostly, liberal progressive friends. I did have some friends and of course my family that were conservative, but I thought if I was this open-minded liberal progressive person, I would be always voting Democrat, which I did for 25, 30 years. It wasn't until 2018 when my daughter started identifying as a trans boy, along with many other girls at her junior high school here in Davis, California. It was almost like the entire school and town was swept away with this idea of the trans kid. And I was not aware of the curriculum or the policies or the training that had been done by the counselors and the teachers and the administrators. So I didn't know when my daughter said she was trans that it was actually something that had been um, sort of introduced to these children in elementary school, and they were sort of together as a social contingent. Many of these girls who were gifted and quirky and creative and sympathetic, sensitive type girls all started identifying as transgender. So that would probably be the moment where I started to become a little more aware that this was a political movement, but it really wasn't until 2021, 2022, when I started asking for public records requests to find out where this material was coming from and who was funding it, that I realized this is a very far left movement. And we have politicians in place like Governor Newsom, who's our governor here in California, Tony Thurmond, who's our superintendent of schools, Rob Bonta, who's our attorney general, all Democrats, as well as our local government in blue towns like Davis. They're all Democrats, so it's very easy for them to all jump on this bandwagon. And because I am so aware of gender ideology impacting my daughter and the risk of being medicalized with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones that would sterilize her, and a double mastectomy, also called a top surgery, that would leave her without healthy breasts or the ability to breastfeed. I knew that the medical part of this was very scary, but I started pushing back first on the sports side and girls' sports. So I've been speaking out at different California Interscholastic Federation meetings, and other places where we have leadership talking about girls' sports and how where it's hurting them. We had a big lawsuit that took place that got national coverage here in Davis, California, because we had an event about protecting girls' sports. And our librarian, who of course is a government official, we have a board of supervisors, they're all Democrats. He shut down our event and violated my First Amendment right to have free speech, as well as the other women on our speaker panel. And we ended up winning the lawsuit. So again, it's not just a medical issue, it's not just sports, it's also a free speech issue. So I really have felt like the Democrats are politicizing this idea of trans or gender ideology, and it's hurting women and girls in so many different ways, and young boys and all vulnerable adults, because there is no transgender person. Humans can't change sex. But it's also a free speech issue, and we're being censored or silenced if we have a viewpoint that's different than the Democrats or the people running our universities and our schools. I've actually been on investigatory leave now for 4 months from my job at UC Davis, which is a university public institution, for my free speech. So it's impacted me personally in many ways. I am planning to vote all red this November, which I've been now doing for a couple years. As a lifelong Democrat, I know that it's only the Republican conservative political party that is willing to support women. It's still defined women as an adult human female, protect children. If you look at the states across the US that no longer allow medicalizing of kids, it's all the Republican states. I think it's either 24 or 26. And that's same with the no boys or men in women's sports. It's again, it's the red states. So we know from what we have in the United States, it's a Republican view to want to protect women and children. This, shouldn't be a political issue. There's progressive countries all over Europe, Norway, France, Finland, UK, others, Sweden, that are no longer medicalizing children. So it should not be a left versus right. I am planning to vote for Donald Trump and JD Vance. I think they're fantastic. I know people have concern that Trump is sexist or racist. He's not perfect. But I know we have 4 years of him in office, and things were better. Immigration, political unrest or war around the world. And I believe, and I've heard him speak in person, he really does believe that we should have parental rights in our schools and that women deserve fair sports. And he promises to get men out of sports, and he promises that our bathrooms and our locker rooms and our shelters and our prisons will be for women again only. And of course, ending the medicalizing of kids. So for me, it is a no-brainer to vote for Trump this November. And I just encourage all the other women out there, or, anyone who believes in reality, to do the same.
So for me, I grew up in a staunchly conservative family. I'm Southern. And there was, there were multiple layers of enculturation there. My grandfather served under Patton. I went off to college, and this was in the early 90s. And it was during this time that the National Organization for Women was starting to really show up on college campuses all over the country, which is not to say they weren't already there, but I saw them getting very active. It was mostly lesbians, which was interesting. And they had their lavender fist banners, and they would paint the backs of their jackets. And it was at this time, too, that the University of Florida, where I attended, formed their first women's studies department. They didn't have one before. And that, to me, was the beginning of my experience with all of this stuff and my entree to feminism, if you will. And I will say this, they tried to get me to join now, and I wanted nothing to do with it. There was something about it that felt very radical. It felt indoctrinatory in a way that didn't gel with what I vibe with. As an observation, or just as a statement of fact, I've always had I get along really well with lesbians. I've always been really good friends with them. But these were just straight up butch dyke lesbians, but they were hardcore feminists. And in college, I studied Simone de Beauvoir. I became a women's studies minor, but I ended up dropping out of school. So we were reading bell hooks, all the things, right? And then I registered as a Democrat when I first registered to vote. I had not been registered before. I voted Democrat once in college in 1992. I voted for Clinton. I really didn't know what I was doing. I remained a registered Democrat for a long time until actually my mother passed away, and I was back in North Carolina in 2017, and I switched my voter registration, but I had never voted again. So I was an inactive registered Democrat that entire time. I was living in New York City. In 2015, I jumped aboard the Trump train, but I kept it. I was in North Carolina for a while, taking care of some family stuff, and then I went back to New York. And when 2016 elections came around, I sat them out. I was pro-Trump. I was with a bunch of people in New York that night. They were all crying big tears when the election results came in, and I turned around and looked at a group of my downtown Lower East Side friends, and I said, "I'm buying shots." And I bought shots for everybody, and people looked at me as if I killed their mother and their best friend. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry you're upset, but shots on me." And they just couldn't believe it. So I was in New York a little while longer, and then my mother died. I came back to North Carolina, where I am now. And I sat things out, but I started to watch what was going on. And I'll tell you, I didn't get super politically active until 2020. Now, I was pro Trump this whole time. But when I started to really see what was going on, especially with the education system and the ideology and all of that, the way that they were manipulating the system and calling it education, social emotional learning was a big one. I started blowing the whistle on that early on. The more research I did, the more I realized that this was social contouring. And eventually, like within the last 3 years, I would say, I I peaked into this mindset that we had to keep these people, get them out of office or keep them out of office by any means necessary. And the only person who was going to help us drain the swamp was Donald Trump. Also, what had piqued me a little bit was 3 years prior, in 2013, I was invited to serve on the board of UNESCO. And I got sworn in at the UN. And I went completely laissez faire after about 4 months and told them to never contact me again. I was on the board of UNESCO in New York. And then what a nightmare. I started to see how the UN was participating in all of this. A lot of people don't know that in 2019, the UN changed the word gender to gender identity. And because all of these leftists and radical leftists, they have institutional power. And so what we started to see was a complete transformation, and that's the word they use in the SDG Sustainable Development Goal collateral, anything they put out, transforming the economy, transforming the education system. Um, they changed it in 2019, gender to gender identity, and because they have institutional power, that's when they really started to use those levers in all institutions, whether it was higher education, film, entertainment, art, banking, medicine, real estate, name a sector, it happened. The capture was institution wide, and that was intentional. That's how they were able to cohesively implement these DEI frameworks. Then along comes Trump, and he's this big disruptor that doesn't fit the bill. And I liked that because I thought, okay, here's a guy that's just going to stick his middle fingers up. They don't know what to do with him. And I'm a bit of an outlier myself. And so I was like, water is definitely seeking its own level on this one. I'm a little embarrassed that I wasn't braver and that I didn't stand up for what I had already decided that I believed in. So I regret not voting for him in 2016. And that's something that I hope, a message from me that I hope will resonate or reassure, or maybe some amalgamation of both, with unaffiliated voters who are on the fence. Do not be afraid to draw your line in the sand and vote for a man that you've been told to hate. I understand why people have their reservations about Donald Trump. But my question to those individuals with those reservations is, how many of those reservations are the result of social contouring at a really subtle level that force teamed you into their belief system that he was bad? I see it a lot. The media has been lying. They're very good at what they do. This DNC machine that's been radically infiltrated by leftist organizations and groups to include at levels of local governance, school boards, county commissioners, city council members, all the way up to federal government positions, like what we see with the squad members, right? Um, you have to ask yourself, and this is a difficult question. I think this is where the rubber meets the road for a lot of people right now, is because what it does is it forces us to admit that we were fooled or that we were somehow manipulated, because nobody wants to admit that they've been manipulated, especially if you've been a hardcore radical feminist for a long time, or you've been, committed to a certain worldview that is strongly rooted in your ideals that are, centrifugally focused on making the world a better place, right? Protecting women, women's rights, and all this codification that happened, Title IX in its original intent, for example. But it's very hard to admit. It's a humbling experience to admit that we were wrong or that we were lied to, especially when we consider ourselves to be the type of people whose eyes are open. Like, that's the part, if anything, that I struggled with the most, was having to just admit that I had been wrong about something, and that I had been force teamed into this mass formation psychosis that demanded my hatred of this man that I had no real reason to hate. The way that the media told us that he was, a misogynist or this or that. Now, I'm used to men's humor and things like that. So I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I guess I can see why this offends certain people, but it's really kind of not that serious, because he's not that man. He's not that person. And I know that. If I could leave anyone, especially people who are on the fence or undecided with anything at all, it would be this. We won't get another chance to create legislative fuel stops in the right way if we don't have Trump in office. But it's not just about Trump. It's down ballot, right? Because this is where the legislative process happens. And unfortunately, we need our legislators to understand, understand the importance of creating these fuel stops. And we're going up against the medical industrial complex. That's just the way it is. And this is about money, and they've used ideological capture to um, lead society into their revenue, their net positive revenue streams. They couldn't do it without the social contouring and the ideological capture. But in my opinion, as far as the medical aspect of it goes, that was always the goal, a big part of the goal. And I would say to anyone who needs that nudge or reassurance regarding Trump, he's not the ogre that we've been told. He's actually a really good man. He's a solid man. He's thorough. Has he made some mistakes along the way? Sure, of course. And he's paid for them, but the mistakes he made were amplified in the wrong direction. And I'm grateful to see how many people have come around and are willing to vote for him. There are so many. When we look in North Carolina, we look at the number of unaffiliateds, how many people have walked away from the Democrat Party and have registered unaffiliated. That tells me something. It says that whatever they're doing, either directly through their platforms or through their infiltrated people that have infiltrated their party, people are not liking it, and they don't want to be Democrats anymore. They don't want to be registered to that party anymore. But we still have to get them over the line to help them understand why voting for Trump. I think the partnership with Kennedy was great. Make America Healthy Again is a wonderful entree into this neutralization of that force teamed hate. I think Kennedy is like a wonderful balm. He's like a salve. He's like the WD-40 we needed to throw on these places where people's minds were stuck. Because I think that by Kennedy partnering with him, it reassured people that if Kennedy was willing to do it, if he was willing to drop out and join forces with team up with Trump, that obviously they together realized that they had an opportunity to reach unaffiliated voters. And so my biggest hope is that people think about what it means to make America healthy again and to make it great again when they go to the polls, either early voting or November 5th, because we won't get another chance and Trump will help us.
Well, Joey, I was raised a Republican. My parents were Republicans, we'll say that. And so I did have a little stint with them when I was young, as I joined the Young Republicans, but mainly for social reasons, mainly because I moved to a new state after college and it was a way to meet people and make friends. And then I moved to California, married my liberal husband, and went to grad school, which is where I really started getting into um, actual politics and policy and what was going on. And but interestingly, in grad school, we had to take a course called diversity, and it was all about the things you think, and then also about gender ideology. And at the time, I just went with it. I was totally easily and quickly indoctrinated with this stuff. They really, really sell it to you, and the gender part, I was like, well, that's not really going to be anything that's, really present in my life. It's going to be, you know, a, at the time, just like many people, probably still today, it was like something that wasn't going to be anything I came across. And then I went to work at a community center once I graduated, and I had to work with a man named Lisa. I had to share an office with him. I had to refer to him with his requested pronouns. I had to share my bathroom with him. He was left my office, our office, a mess every time, and I only had a few minutes to clean it to get ready for my clients. But um, and at this point, I was like, it was bothering me. I mean, I had to pretend it wasn't. I went along with it. I had a year to get my hours done, but it was bothering me. And I do think that a lot of people today that even think they go with this don't recognize things happening in their body that are telling them that there is, a danger or an alarm, something to pay attention to. But so then I graduated, and that was that. And I got out and went to work. And my son came home with, telling me he was a girl after his first year of private high school. And I was just like stunned, like, where did this come from? Because I was still on this is really not anything that's going to hit me. And I guess that's when I really started looking into where did this come from? And that's where I found Jennifer Billick, and, you know, just this isn't just by accident. This is really a big thing happening. And then I found, morethansexed.org, which is what has to be taught in our schools here in California, which is all about gender and starts in 5th grade. And so, so then when Biden was president, who I did vote for, um, I I was upset the very first day because he changed the word sex to gender. And I knew that that was not, going to be, I guess, free. There was going to be some damage and harm to come from that to women and girls. Um, so at that point, I guess when, I decided I wasn't going to vote for Biden again. And I think my thought was really, well, I'm just going to vote for Trump. And I think I thought it was a sort of a protest vote, not really, it was a protest vote. But then I really started looking into things, and I started changing the channel. I started reading other things, and other people were changing too, Matt Taibbi, and I got into the, gen spect and gender things and met Michael Schellenberger and, started reading that. So then I just started seeing that there was so much going on behind the scenes that I was never aware of. I was just fully trusting of people and their intentions. And I no longer am that, especially when it comes to the Democrat Party. I see things differently now, and I see what they're doing with the media and, censorship. And so, yeah, initially my thing was I'm not voting for these people who don't know what a woman is. And my husband would call me a one issue voter. But in my opinion, that's not even one issue because it has so many arms. It has parents' rights arms, it has girls and women's rights arms. It just, it's not a one issue, even if it looks like one. It also creates another dividing factor, which is what I think the Dems are excellent at doing, is trying to really, they talk about unity, but they really want to divide. So I saw it a different way. And the more I leaned in, the more that I saw, even about, George Soros and HRC, which is what I learned from Jennifer, and ESG, which many people still don't know about. And, that rates companies according to how progressive and liberal they are, and hedge fund and fund managers won't invest in them. So it's just really, you see how these things are being forced, we're being bullied, and it's kind of terrifying. So it's not kind of terrifying, it is really terrifying me. And then the more I looked into things, at first I thought I couldn't hate Trump any more. I thought I couldn't hate anyone more than I hated Trump. I really thought that. I just couldn't stand the man. I couldn't stand to listen to him. I couldn't stand it. And now I actually appreciate him. I actually respect a lot of things I respect what he's doing. There may be a lot of things I don't like about him as a man, but as a leader, I think he's a good one. And yeah, so many things have changed, and then the whole Middle East thing. I mean, there's just so many things. The Middle East war, the anti-Semitism, the protests at our colleges, and never ending. And I mean, sure, free speech, but I look at the BLM riots differently now than I did then. I mean, I just really, just everything, the way I look at things and the way that I see things and the way that I receive information has changed. And I really believe that if Harris wins this election, we will basically be living in a communist country. I mean, it blows my mind that people cannot see it, especially with Waltz's background. I spent a lot of time in China. You don't just go get to teach there. You just don't get to do that unless you think like them. It just doesn't happen. They don't even let you roam around free as a tourist. You have to have some guide with you, a state guide, not an Abercrombie and Kent guide. But so I just think we're going to be in big trouble. We're going to have censored speech. We're going to have, controlled information, which we already do have, and we especially have it in blue states like California, which is why I refer to it as Commie Cali. But we're not going to have any freedom. And with this Equality Act being passed, women are not going to have any means of fighting. Men are going to have rights over us, which no one seems to see, because they sell it as the LGB. They add that in, they keep riding on the coattails of that. And I just see it all differently. I don't know what else to say. I hope she loses. I really hope she loses. I mean, I hope Trump wins. When I started grad school, I was still a registered Republican, and then I had to take this course called diversity, which was mandatory. And I loved the course. It was eye-opening, and it had a big impact on me. And that is when I changed my designation to Democrat here in California. So the diversity class, I fell in love with it. I loved everything about it. It was eye-opening to me. And like I said, I became the social justice warrior for a little while. But then I realized, I mean, it was just all about white people being bad, white people being guilty, white privilege, and that I needed to apologize for that everywhere. I needed to make up for it in all places. And that's when I just started getting suspicious of the goal of this and what they're trying to tell us. I mean, everybody in the class was a white person. And then we also had an issue around, you know, the Palestine-Israel issue even there. So in everywhere, so even then that was my first sort of inkling about, again, Israel is bad. The oppressor, the colonizer, it was just all this, that everything we've done has been bad and wrong and harmful, and we must make up for it.
And this is my story of my political leanings that I have experienced for the last 10 years. I came to this country in the early 90s when I learned English, and I immediately fell in with yogis, and I fell in with activists most of all. And the people I was trained in were activists on all levels, but especially for animals. So I was brought up with that kind of attitude of being a social justice warrior. And I was very much on board. I was involved in early development of programs for social justice warriors, such as in the yoga world, and as active as an animals rights activist. And for all people, really, I even had that in my bio. So that's a very important part. When I was having a yoga studio in the Bay Area in San Francisco, I even created a program that was called Spiritual Activation. And I brought together activists like Julia Butterfly Hill and Jack Cornfield and Yvonne Peters from the Arctic. These were all activists, and I brought them together to have people get more engaged in politics. And my politics were extremely progressive, very leftist. It was very important. I was part of that program, even got broadcast through the KPFA. I had many different programs that I was a part of. I was teaching with Wes Nisker, who was a beautiful voice in the Bay Area, but he was a Buddhist. He died a few years ago, but he was a Buddhist teacher, but also an activist. So yeah, I was very involved. I was teaching at San Quentin. I was very involved in social justice, and it was very important to me to be a voice for the marginalized and the disenfranchised, whether that was the environment or animals or people. I was on the forefront. And then came along, so I was part of a program called YES, which is Youth for Environmental Sanity. That was a program that came through John Robbins's son, Ocean Robin. And I would go to they would hold camps mostly in California for activists from all around the world that we would get together and we would do programs together and, practice a speech and how to become a better activist. And I used to be a yoga teacher there, and I loved it. It was beautiful. And I also lived in Brazil for many years. So I and I was married to a Black husband in Brazil. So I'm very well acquainted of racism, and I was extremely engaged in the fight for marginalized communities and so on. And then around the early 2000s, I think it was like maybe 2006, and I was at a camp in California with Yes, and I noticed that the tone was changing. And it was like a real wake-up call. It was like I said something that was timeless, like it was probably a Buddhist teaching that was for all people, which normally was being very well received. And that one time there were activists that were at that camp, and they attacked me. That never had happened. Usually these programs were like a love fest. Okay, I'll try to be more succinct. So anyways, what was really amazing to me was like I was attacked over this timeless teaching, I said, and I was very confused. I was like, I had said this many times, and this woman came to me and she said, Kachi, what you said, it's not what you said. It's because you're white that it's a problem. And I remember like being really perplexed, like that didn't make any sense. So that was my first exposure to like something going off the rails, that our social justice camp suddenly had taken a turn toward something that I couldn't understand. Like I was still very much from the old guard of Martin Luther King, is like you judge somebody not by the color of your skin, by the content of your character. And so I didn't understand what had changed. And that was my first introduction to race theory. Forward a few years, 2016, I ran into a lesbian friend of mine from the Bay Area who came up to me and said, Kachi, like that the lesbian bars are disappearing in San Francisco. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? So she explained to me, and I started to research. Like there was very, very little information out there at that time. But I started to research and follow people on Facebook, especially. And I started to realize the gender ideology had taken over. So this is the pendant to race theory is gender theory, and which is coming out of the same kitchen, and it's equally off the rails. Like there's no more common sense to it. And so because I'm a passionate feminist, and I didn't understand what was happening to the left. It just veered off the rails into a place that I couldn't follow. So soon after that, I started to write a blog. And I had done that for many years as a yoga teacher. I had my own newsletter that I sent out, and I sent out a newsletter about gender ideology. Basically, it was called reality versus biology or something like that. And it got a huge response. And there was a first wave of cancellation that followed that, attacks, which just confirmed that something was really going off the rails. I was like, well, how could it be that all the advances that our foremothers fought for were suddenly in question? Like, how is it in question that the humans are sexed, that we have a biology that matters, that we have a lived experience that matters? So that was a real wake-up call. And I basically started speaking out about that more. And then I did a podcast for which I was even more canceled. And it just strengthened my resolve to fight for female rights and fight, especially because since I myself am a gender nonconforming or was girl and I'm bisexual, I was really interested in fighting for female rights and fighting for the right of gender nonconforming girls to be tomboys and to grow up intact, physically intact. And I ran headlong into this ideology that seemed to penetrate and captivate all of my former tribe. And I honestly didn't understand how it could happen. Like, what happened to critical thinking that used to be very important, and what happened to speaking truth to power? I didn't understand that either. So I was very confused about that. That said, I was still very much on the left. I had very strong Trump derangement syndrome. I was literally hating everything that came out of his mouth, and I believed everything that was being said. And there were two poignant moments where obviously my sense of trust in the narrative that the left and the media was peddling had already been cracked through, what I had feminist friends that were on at an event, and then I saw what the mainstream media was saying about it. I knew firsthand that those were lies, that this never happened. So it was already cracked. My sense of trust in the official narrative had been definitely damaged, but I still was very much on the left, believing climate change, believing the official narrative, believing everything about Trump. And then my husband, who is a little bit more clear-eyed than I am, he encouraged me every time that something came out and I was upset about, he encouraged me to actually see the whole thing. So there were two incidences that really cracked everything open. One was the thing about Charlottesville, where Trump allegedly said that there are good people on both sides, and that was trotted out as that he was endorsing white supremacy. And when I actually looked at the whole video, he clearly and unequivocally condemned white supremacy. That quote was taken out of context. It was not about what happened in Charlottesville. That was about something else. I was like, I couldn't believe it. That was one big crack. And then the other one was when those Catholic boys, I forget, they were in Washington, D.C., and there was this American elder who came into their face. I was outraged because my husband is part Native, and I was very upset. I was like, wow, like, and then I watched the whole video and I realized that this boy, 16-year-old, he was just awkward with his little Trump hat. He didn't know what to do when this American elder came into his face and started drumming. He was just standing there and being insecure and grinning. And this boy received death threats and they went after him. So it was a big shock to realize, like, oh, they just took a little snippet that made it look like he was the aggressor, but actually he wasn't. And after that, everything crumbled for me. I didn't believe anything they said anymore. And that doesn't mean that I believe automatically what is being said on the right. I don't. But I will certainly look at what is being said on the right. I have certain trusted sources that are some slightly left, some slightly right. And after I've seen the whole palette, I will use my critical mind, my critical thinking, and I will make my own mind. And sometimes I have to wait until there's more information that is coming through. And yes, it is a very difficult time. Like we're in literally the Wild West. Nobody knows what is true. We have to use a lot of discerning thinking, critical thinking. We have to question the narrative. What I've noticed is that on the left, there is no deviance from the narrative. Like if you question even the smallest part of the left, you're going to be canceled. While on the right, there actually is space to discuss. And I figured that out. I used to believe that all of the people in the middle of the country are deplorables and they're all racists. And I know now that it isn't true. Why do I know that? Because I moved to a red state. And I actually was in northern Idaho for a while. And in a supposedly white supremacist stronghold. And there was a Black woman from Puerto Rico that lives there. And so I went, like, we became friends. And I went to her and I was like, okay, tell me the skinny, like how bad. She had been living there for 7 years. Complete Trump voting, Republican, complete, like everybody. And so I was like, how bad is it? And she's like, I don't lock my door at night, okay? That's how bad the racism was. Like she occasionally encountered somebody, but for the most part, it was non-existent, even in a conservative stronghold, northern Idaho. And I was like, okay, so this is complete bullshit. I have found out that most Americans are really decent people. Yes, we disagree about abortion, but guess what? They knew that I disagreed with them about abortion, and they didn't cancel me for it. Not like the left who canceled me for believing that women have sex-based rights. So it's just not true. The narrative that they're spinning is just not true. And I abhor lies and hypocrisy. And so this is how I ended up from a progressive social justice warrior to becoming a Trump voter, because I am going to vote for Trump. So the most recent development of Maha joining MAGA, which is RFK Jr., which I've been following for a long time, is unbelievable. I actually feel like we're living in the Lord of the Rings right now, where like the most unlikely team gets together against the dark force, which it really is. The Democrats have become the dark force of like big corporation, big pharma, big corruption, big greed, big war. And what's on the other side? It's Trump. It's RFK Jr. It's like it's like the hobbits and the ants, the trees and the eagles, and the most unlikely team is getting together. It's really funny to watch, like how Elon Musk is joining, how Nicole Shanahan, how Vivek Ramaswamy, who is absolutely eloquent, Tulsi, who is amazing. So I get goosebumps just by what Trump has assembled. Is Trump perfect? No, he isn't. Is he crude? Yes, he is. Is he not entirely to be trusted? For sure, but he also is a disruptor. And how do you know? Cheney is now endorsing Harris. I mean, come on. If that doesn't destroy your illusion of the duopoly, like, oh, they appeared like to be on different sides, but they were actually always, that was the establishment. Why do they hate Trump so much? Because he's actually the disruptor. He's coming in and he doesn't need to do it. Look at him. He's a millionaire. He could be golfing and he's sacrificing himself. He's been attacked twice, almost lost his life, and he's still doing it because he's for the people. No, he's not perfect, but the team that he assembles is mighty. It's like the Lord of the Rings.
So I grew up default Democrat. I grew up in Davis, California, a university town that was nothing but left. And that was all that I was exposed to in our home, in our school. I grew up assuming that we were just automatically occupying the moral high ground. I was never exposed to anything that questioned that narrative. Republicans were bad. The only little glimmer that I can remember as a child of anything that questioned that narrative was an uncle that I had. And he was a gay man, and he was a staunch Republican. And my mother had a very difficult time even maintaining a relationship with him. And she could never wrap her head around what she perceived as a betrayal. Looking back on it now, a lot more makes sense. But that was really the only thing when I was growing up that made me even question this tribal loyalty that my family seemed to have towards the Democrats. It wasn't really until 2014 that I started even questioning this worldview. I had a conversation with a conservative. It lasted for hours. And in it, she presented something to me that I had never, ever considered. Her perspective was that Obama hated our country, absolutely hated our country, and that was his agenda to fundamentally change our country to a vision that he had. And again, I'd never even considered such a thing. And I didn't agree with her at the time. But she planted a seed in my mind. And I think my mind was made fertile by that conversation being open and respectful and one of good faith. Then in 2016, my mind started opening a little bit more. And really, it was the shafting of Bernie Sanders. That was the next moment where I started to question the narrative, particularly because my parents were huge Bernie Sanders fans. And they had the Feel the Burn pins and stickers. And then here we go with the Democratic Party electing Hillary Clinton instead and completely shafting their base who had clearly voted for someone else. And I looked at my parents and I was wondering, how on earth are you okay with this? How are you okay with being disenfranchised? I abstained from voting in that election. I couldn't bring myself to vote for Trump. At that time, I didn't even realize that I never listened to what Trump actually said. I only listened to what they said he said. I listened to what the corporate media said he said. I never listened to him. It didn't even occur to me that when I would watch him speaking on the television, I couldn't hear his voice because the corporate media presenters were speaking over him and saying what he said while the tape was playing of him in the background. I can't believe I didn't notice that, but I didn't. So in 2016, I couldn't vote for anyone. And I had a neighbor of mine, a man who was also hardcore default left. And he was so shocked when I told him I wasn't going to vote for Hillary. So how can you not vote for Hillary? Don't you want a woman as president? said, no, I don't want a woman as president. I want a president who's good for our country as president. I don't care what sex they are. I don't care what their skin color is. I want a competent leader that's right for our country. And she is not it. And he just couldn't wrap his mind around that. And I got that from so many people I loved and respected and admired. This constant focus on superficial identity. And it just seemed so short-sighted to me. Then I started listening to more conservative voices. I started listening to Jordan Peterson, particularly with regards to how we never really considered the tragedy, or rather the horror of the far left. What damage far left ideologies had wreaked upon humanity. That was really shocking to me. And he was so right. And it's not just him. Lots of people have spoken about this. And I've listened to lots of people speak about this. But we have so much emphasis on all the evils of the far right presented to us in our schooling. But we never, ever discuss the millions and millions of people who've died because of communism and socialism and far left ideologies. We rarely talk about the evils of Islamism. And if I could go back a little bit further, that was another thing that really started waking me up about the lies on the left. My ex was an apostate, moved to America from Kuwait. And his main reason for leaving was because he couldn't not be a Muslim in the Middle East, and he didn't believe in it. And I didn't understand at the time how intolerant Islam really was. But learning from him really opened my eyes, and watching the left completely excuse the intolerance of that religion and its hatred of women and its hatred of homosexuals and its explicit goal of killing all Jews and all non-believers. How can you not see this as evil? The moral relativism of the left really started getting under my skin. It really started grating. And I remember conversations with loved ones about how the hijab is just part of their culture. They embrace it. And just the ignorance of that idea that it's okay for some women to be treated that way, that it's okay for women to be shrouded and silenced because that's where they were born. Then another conservative voice I started listening to, I started watching Dennis Prager's 5-minute videos. And I listened to Dr. Carol Swain's 5-minute video regarding the truth of the Democratic Party, the history of the Democratic Party, going from its inception through to today. That's an incredible video. I highly recommend people look that one up. The fundamental racism that's always existed in the Democratic Party. And this is not to say that I think that all Democrats are racist. I certainly don't. But this is one of those things that we do not hear about. There is no balanced narrative on the left between the evils that the Democratic Party have perpetrated since their inception, going back to the very first one, Andrew Jackson, forcing the Native Americans along the Trail of Tears. Fast forward to 2020, Tulsi Gabbard, I She was the first politician I'd ever actually donated money to. I'm a huge fan of Tulsi Gabbard. And again, I watched the Democratic Party shaft her in the most abysmal, disgusting, despicable way possible. And again, Democrat, the base, just seemed to be okay with it. They just seemed to be okay with the Democratic National Convention installing a candidate. How can anybody be okay with their voices just being erased? I still wasn't ready to actually listen to Trump's words, though. I still hadn't realized that the corporate media was absolutely complicit in silencing what people actually had to say. So I wrote Tulsi Gabbard's name in, and I voted for her anyways in the sapphire blue state of California. And then fast forward again to today. I cannot understand how any woman who has even a glimmer of an idea of how disastrous transgenderism is for humanity, I cannot understand how any woman would continue to support the Democratic Party. They are erasing us in language and in law. They are breaking apart our sex-based humanity. They are sterilizing and butchering our children and the mentally ill. They are silencing us. We can't even talk about this. And all the while, they're using abortion as a political cudgel. And they've been using it for 50 years. And women don't seem to get it. Women on the left still don't seem to get it. They have replaced their moral compasses with political tribalism to the point where they cannot even see how bending the knee is just going to end up with them having their heads cut off. So I'm voting for Trump. I'm voting for Vance. I'm voting for Kennedy. I'm voting for Gabbard. I'm voting for the Unity Party, e pluribus unum. I'm voting for women's rights, our actual rights, not just this illusionary right to kill our baby if we feel we need to do so in our womb. I'm voting for our right to exist. I'm voting for our voices to be heard. And I'm voting because I love America. And right around the same time as I was witnessing the DNC's treatment of Tulsi Gabbard, I discovered Kelly J. Keene. And listening to her speak the truth, the black and white truth about something that the left was pushing so hard, the idea that sex mimicry was somehow healthcare. And I knew from personal experience with a loved one that it was lies. But I also knew that the left wouldn't talk about the lies. They wouldn't let anybody call it out for being lies. And that's just continued on through to today. What I'll end with is something that I just recently learned. And it goes back to what I said earlier about how I never realized that I never actually listened to what Trump said. I was so complacent and just listened to what the Democrats said he said. I only recently learned that in the 2016 debate between him and Hillary Clinton, he brought Bill Clinton's victims to that debate. They had a front row seat to that debate. And I recently watched a clip of him sitting at a panel with these brave, silenced women. And again, I'm watching the corporate news presenters speak over him at this panel, telling us what he supposedly said, instead of letting us listen to what he said. And more importantly than that, they didn't let us listen to what the women said. And this, to me, perfectly encapsulates the problem and the betrayal of the Democratic Party towards women. They are more interested in taking out Trump than they are in the actual victims. And the left, they don't care about victims. What they want is to take out Trump. And it's not because they hate him, it's because they know he is the only threat to their agenda. And again, that's why I'm voting for the Unity Party.
Hi, yes, I am talking about the fact that I've been a lifelong Democrat, and it's been a long life. I'm 80 years old now. I have probably voted Democrat in every single election that I voted for. Politically, I've been excited by certain campaigns and worked in them. I worked on JFK's campaign in the 60s. And that was a very exciting time. I got very excited when the women's movement started. I participated in that. And then in between, I've had big laps. So, but now, when Trump came on the scene, and I want to say I was completely buying all the propaganda about him. I completely believed the lies, except for two things. My husband was very pro-Trump, which was a difficulty in our marriage for a few years now. And even at the time, I had dreams about Trump. And in the dreams, I always felt secure and safe. And he was such a wonderful man. And I'd wake up going, what the heck is that about? So I just threw that out the door. And when this election came up, I began to, first of all, I saw how the Democrats were doing this crazy stuff just with their convention, this absolutely fake joy that I couldn't even watch it. Kamala, yeah, I would get excited about a woman president, but not that one, because there's something very strange going on. And I sensed that, I felt that more than knew that. And then I saw Bobby Kennedy, and that was the changer for me. It was an immediate connection. I got so excited about what he was saying because I am also an environmentalist. I love nature. I need nature. I loved his record about litigating against Trump and actually winning. And then I heard that Trump invited him to fly home on the plane with him. What a good loser. I mean, I thought, gee, what kind of person does that? I kept listening to Kennedy, and I also got involved with working on his campaign locally a little bit and met all these wonderful people who knew a whole lot more than I knew because I had been stuck in the Democratic propaganda. I didn't know the severity of late-term abortions. I didn't know the severity of what was going on with our transgender kids and the surgeries they were being subjected to without their knowledge, without parental assent. All that is horrifying to me. And when Bobby, I still was kind of hating Trump because I was planning to vote for Bobby. But when Bobby made that switch to join with Trump because of the very reasonable decision that he saw he couldn't really win, but that would give him a platform, I had to reevaluate everything. I thought, my God, what is he seeing in Trump? And when I started seeing, first of all, how they were treating Bobby legally, all those court cases and tying his hands and censoring him and not giving him enough time to run his campaign, it hit me. I thought, whoa, they must be doing that to Trump too. And I started seeing the light just went off or on, I should say. It was like blinking, flashing a bright light, like a strobe in my brain. And all of a sudden it all fell into place. And I am just, amazed at how slick that democratic propaganda machine is. And I mean, we have to do what we can to expose it, and it's being exposed. And that's thanks to RFK Jr. I would still love to see him be president at some point, but then I'm thinking, well, this is a better choice for him because now he doesn't have to deal with all of the political stuff. He can really focus on the children, focus on the earth, focus on the healing. And one of the really impressive things with Trump and Kennedy joining forces is that they are showing, not just talking about it, but that they are showing what it means to listen to someone with whom you have a different opinion. My God, that's what we grew up learning in college. Where did that all go? It's like gone. But they're bringing it back and they're showing it. They're not just talking about it. And that is so powerful. And that is because of RFK. I'm not certain Trump could have come to that on his own, or maybe he could have, I don't know. But that union, and then when they're adding Tulsi to it, and the whole range of wonderful human beings that Trump is putting around him now and drawing to him is so exciting and so hopeful that you just want to be a part of it, and they just have to win. They have to win because we need them to win because we need to win. Another reason I'm voting for Trump is because of the whole concept of what I understand so far about gender ideology, and I'm still learning and just trying to grasp. I understand that this movement is coming from the top down, it's coming from pharmaceuticals, it's coming from our government. We are killing our children who don't understand what sex is all about, let alone changing their gender. Trump is saying that from day one, he's going to put a stop to the financing for this stuff. And it just really has to stop. We're on a suicidal track with this. We're killing our children. We're killing ourselves. It's immoral. It's absolutely, completely out of the question, unacceptable.
I grew up in New Jersey in a very blue no matter who household, both parents heavily Democratic and involved in local politics. Scared my parents when I was young by having a brief fascination with Ronald Reagan. Nearly gave my father a heart attack by that. College and high school spent much time saving the whales with any funds that I raised, saving the bees, saving everybody who I could save. Joined Emily's List and MoveOn.org and all of the wonderful blue no matter who organizations, and continued supporting all of those organizations and blue no matter who until I was an adult. Volunteered for Carrie Edwards and tried to drive campaigning with that team here in New Jersey. Also volunteered for Hillary Rodham Clinton, doing the same, working with local organizations and trying to actively campaign for her. During COVID, I started seeing the massive amount of censorship happening to all of the places I was listening to at that time. I had become a mother, and I had 3 children in their early teens and even younger than that. And I had always been incredibly active and passionate about natural foods, natural birth, attachment parenting, baby wearing, breastfeeding, and during COVID, recognizing that all of the people I would listen to for and look at for this information were being censored, were being silenced, were being shut down. And I saw that pretty quickly, and it didn't feel right. Um, during Trump's during Trump's election and presidency, I actually took my children to Trenton, New Jersey, and we marched against Trump. Marched with thousands of other people, signs, really protesting the fact that Trump had become president. And so that's just a little background about how much I truly disliked Trump and believed every blue no matter who sentiment that I had. So again, then during COVID, recognizing that all of these organizations, Del Bigtree and the High Wire, a bunch of other platforms, Joe Rogan, being censored and being deplatformed, made me question very quickly. Made me question what portion of my complete disdain at that time for Trump was as a result of what I had been told to believe, as opposed to what was actually truthful. And so I'm voting for him. I voted for him last election. Unfortunately, Biden won. And I plan on voting for him this election as well. And I urge everybody to listen to long form interviews with him. Try to actually see all of the positive stuff that was as a result of his presidency, all the good that he has done, and what kind of a person he truly is versus what you've been told to believe instead.
So I grew up in Portland in the 80s in the environmentalist movement. My dad was really into conspiracy theories. He talked a lot about the military-industrial complex, Smedley Butler. I've been known about him my entire life. All of those things. So growing up, I had a very big distrust of the government. I was never really a Democrat, although I leaned that direction. I've always been registered and independent because I always thought we needed more parties and that this was kind of like a duopoly that was going on that oftentimes became corrupt over time. And so most of my life I would vote for independents or green or Democrat, especially when it came to presidential elections. I'd vote Democrat. Come the first time around in 2016, when Trump ran for office, I was a big Bernie supporter and really did not like Hillary Clinton at all, to be honest. In the end, I ended up very begrudgingly voting for her because of just my views on Trump at the time and everything they were showing on, news. Although you would think with my background, I wouldn't have trusted that, but I did. Gosh, my daughter was 2, so she was pretty young in her life. And then moving forward, gosh, I guess it happened pretty quickly. Because by the time that 2020 rolled around, I had completely changed my mind. So right about the time that COVID had hit, I started kind of paying more attention. I guess I had more time on my hands being home. I started paying more attention to what was going on. And of course, when your kid is out of school and they're doing these online courses, and you kind of get to see more of what's going on in their curriculum. And I had started to notice some of the stuff that they were putting into my daughter's first grade curriculum, talking about this gender unicorn, gender identity, being separate from their physical bodies. And it really gave me a pause. And at that point, I had attempted to talk to the school about it and got nowhere. And so I had just decided that I was going to pull her and start homeschooling. Because I found it as a feminist, as a liberal, I found that very concerning and regressive to be telling these kids that being a boy or a girl or a man or a woman was dependent on how feminine or masculine you are. And that wasn't the message I wanted my daughter to hear about what it meant to become a woman. And so then just kind of watching everything that went on during COVID, it just all seemed very sketchy. I'm a small business owner, and it basically did destroy my business. I don't think I'll ever come back from that. And just the way that they were just pushing everything out, pressuring people when it came to bodily autonomy, all these things just gave me a great pause. And so I started kind of looking into other people who were having the same questions that I did, and started talking to other people, especially other women, women who are feminists as well, and just in discussion, all of the things that they had seen. And so by the time that the 2020 election rolled around, I was already convinced that voting for the Democrats would be a terrible idea, and that all of these things that they were pushing, men and women's prisons, boys and men and women and girls sports, all of that would just continue. And I know the Democrats want women to believe that the only issue that matters to women is abortion. I'm pro-choice. I will always be pro-choice. Maybe not to the extreme that we see some today, but my mind won't change on that. But I just don't believe, as a mother of a daughter, that abortion is the only issue that we should care about for women and girls. There's so much more that girls need going into the future. They need opportunity. They need inclusion in society. They can't be safe if they have to worry about intimate spaces where they're vulnerable, being full, having men coming into these spaces, men with paraphilic disorders coming into these spaces. It makes it to the point where they're not able to be included in society because it's not safe to be. And then sports, I mean, it inspires girls to become leaders. We talk about how we want girls to be empowered and to learn how to be in leadership, and sports is such a huge part of that. And so when we allow boys to come and take over girls' sports, we're taking away their opportunity to learn how to lead, to work as a team, all the skills they would need if they were going to move forward into politics or corporations, even any kind of job where they would be leading a team of people. And so when I weighed them all up, the sacrifice that would be made voting for Democrats, and the sacrifice made voting for Republicans, I found that the sacrifice made voting for Democrats was far too much to give, having a daughter. And so 2020, I did vote for Trump. I wasn't one of the people that waited on that. I tend to make decisions pretty quickly. And then now, and that was still kind of questionable for me. It was very, I had to think a lot about it. And I was kind of unsure up until the very last minute. Now I'm absolutely positive. And it's not because of Trump. It's because of the people he's putting in the positions around him. It's because of RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and what is Casey? Is it Casey Mead, the Stanford doctor, who's talking about how they don't actually teach for health. all of these people are why I want to vote in that direction, because they actually do care. They actually have something to say. They have a platform, they have a goal, they have a plan. And Tulsi Gabbard, of course, has already shown her integrity to not be bought out. RFK has spent his life fighting against environmental toxins and against huge conglomerates that are poisoning our food, like Monsanto, which I grew up protesting against and as a child. And so the way I see Trump now is that, you know, he is tough. And even if, and he probably is a narcissist, but I think that his supply is being the hero of the American people. And if we can use that in our advantage, and he's putting the people in the right positions this time around, like he hadn't done before, I think anything's possible. And I think it's worth breaking free of the current system that is actually destroying us and harming our children. And I guess for me, Trump is hope. I really don't see moving forward with the Democrats. I think that they're all owned by big money and invested in destroying the environment, destroying our health. I don't see how anything good can come of this. And I think endorsements speak it all. Cheney endorsing Kamala should tell us who the warmonger is. And I think if people stopped listening to the news and started actually looking into things, they would realize the same thing.
Okay, so I was born and raised in the Democrat Party my entire life. My father grew up blue collar family, and it was just a foregone conclusion that all of us would be Democrats. And at some point, my father, being wiser than I, switched parties, and I couldn't quite understand it until I moved to California because I was so cast in the die liberal, progressive. I would describe myself free to be you and me. Loved how California was just anything goes. And then I had a family, 2 kids, busy doing mom duties and working, and got hit in the face with a pie of gender ideology when my daughter said that she was actually a transgender boy. And that was the first opening that something is going seriously wrong in our country. And as I dug deeper into what gender ideology was and is and who was pushing it, I was actually gobsmacked to learn that it was the Democrats, 100% behind it in every fashion. What was being invaded in our schools, the medical community, it was always the Democrats. The party that I thought was the party of science is not actually the party of science. It's the party of ideological belief system. And again, I thought myself as educated. I read nothing but the New York Times, the Atlantic, very left. I mean, God forbid I would ever turn on Fox News. I would probably break out in hives. And that's what I believed in. And once I started to pull on that sweater, that string in that sweater, everything unraveled for me. And it was a really difficult awakening because I truly believed in my party. I had never voted for a Republican in 37 years. It's a long time. I believed in that they supported women's rights. And that's just not true. Not true when you say anyone can be a woman. How can they support women's rights when they can't define what a woman is? There are no rights. And as I, delved deeper into what my party was doing, I also learned that they did this thing called forced teaming. So they would connect abortion with transgenderism. They would connect a racism bill to transgenderism. And this was trickery. This is all trickery to try to split the vote and to take the people who are not paying that much attention to it and tricking them into believing that if you don't vote Democrat, you're going to lose your rights to abortion. And that's a lie. And I know a lot of radical feminists, and they can't get unstuck from that issue. They can't actually see that the abortion issue is to trick them. And for that, I'm really sorry for them, because if that's what you're voting on and you live in a blue state, you're making a huge mistake, because abortion's going to be in the blue states probably forever. And you're going to vote based on that. You're going to vote for 4 more years of what we already know. No, the Democrats eviscerated Title IX. If you're a woman, how can you vote for an administration that is allowing men to compete as women in sports? I have yet to hear a good answer. Well, I hear the answer is, orange man scary, right? Trump derangement syndrome is real. I had it. I actually protested against Donald Trump in 2016. I had it. I believed that man was the devil incarnate. Now, we know that that's not true, because for 4 years, our country did not implode. It did not become a dictatorship. And women still had the right to have abortions under Trump. He's actually quite a moderate. So I implore my fellow Democrats, those who I would call traditional Democrats, who grew up when I grew up, when the Democrat Party actually cared about the little man, the blue collar people, families, women, vote for Trump. And if you're not willing to do that, and I understand that it's a hard ask, but at least don't vote for Kamala, and vote all the down ticket congressional members and your local politicians, vote Republican there. Because if you don't, you're saying that you're okay with 4 more years of men being in women's bathrooms, prisons, sports, and you're okay with families being destroyed by gender. The Democrats are behind all of the taking of children from parents who refuse to transition their children. Let that sink in for a moment. Parents across this nation are losing custody of their children because they believe in biological reality, and they refuse to subject their child to irreversible experimental medical procedures. That is the Democrat Party now. That is who you are voting for if you vote for a Democrat. So hold your nose and vote correctly if you believe in women's rights, children's rights, and well, I don't have time to get into what the Democrats are doing with First Amendment, but it should terrify everyone. So that's what I have to say. It's hard. It's hard to open your eyes and see it. It's hard to admit to yourself that you were hoodwinked and that you fell for the propaganda. But put your embarrassment aside and actually look at what the Democrats have done to women and children versus what the Republicans will do. Thanks.